Okay, I'm Prashanth Kamalakanthan, writer, director, editor of Have a Nice Life.
So to open up with the editing of this film in particular, I was blown away. I'm just curious, did you shot list this? Did you have the edit in your head while you were filming? Because just the opening 10 minutes, I feel like, when we get introduced to these two ladies, your editing process is wild and a part of the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I think I was very influenced by a lot of new wave filmmaking, watching this, and some of it is referenced in the film, like both obliquely and with the Matsumoto thing, that's a big nod to Funeral Parade of Roses, which was this really kind of cool punk Japanese new wave film, and I just was very inspired by these movies because they come at a time in both of these countries, France and Japan, where there's this generation of filmmakers reacting to a film culture that they feel is really ossified and alien to them and doesn't really reflect their experiences or how they look at or think about the world. And so they were like, well, how can we actually put together movies that kind of are structured like the way we think and the way we see, and so we tried to approach the editing in the same way, and definitely there was a shot list that I developed with our DP. Lasse Tolboll is this really great Danish DP I met at NYU, and so we had this idea, but I'd always known that in the edit that we would follow kind of the characters and the way that they looked at the world, and their sense of time was really what we tried to kind of reflect in the cutting, especially in the first 10 minutes. I think you'll see this kind of relationship between the kind of the slowness and the stasis of Jodie's world versus the kind of fastness and paranoia and agitation of Sophie.
Where did you shoot?
Mostly in Durham, North Carolina, which is where I spent a lot of time. I grew up around there and went to school in Durham. So a lot of the locations, so my parents' house is Jodie's house, and so that's kind of between Raleigh and Durham. The concert venue where Sophie wakes up, that's a concert venue that I worked at. It's in Durham. We flyered the old neighborhood that I lived in. We flyered people's mailboxes saying, hey, do you want to help be part of this movie? We're looking for a house location, and that was Sophie's house in the end. And so it was real community effort. We really had a lot of support from people living down there who really, that was one of the great things about going back home to shoot this movie, because in New York, where we're based now, it's you say you want to make a movie and you turn into a piggy bank for people. It's how much money can we shake out of you? And it's down there, back home, it's you're making a movie. People are excited, they want to help, and they're super stoked to be a part of this project in their backyard. And that's just what we found making this movie. And I think it's kind of reflected in the locations of the film. Yeah.
It's funny. I've talked to so many Tisch people, but also Columbia University, and the battle between the way Columbia views landscape compared to a Tisch grad is remarkable. And it was so refreshing to hear that you went home to shoot this, because I don't know many Tisch grads that would have the guts to shoot outside of that New York hustle and bustle, and you took the step back to bring it home, and the location is just as important for the story, even though it's very subtle. I love that it's in the background, but you're not showing us this huge wide scape of Durham. This is just local living. I love that part of the film.
I don't think we could have made it another way. The other thing is that, as I might have mentioned, this was my graduate thesis at NYU. I really had this fire under my butt to get this done, because I knew that was a special moment where, I had all this institutional support. NYU was going to help us with equipment. But also your community, your family, and your friends are excited to pitch in, say, if it's your thesis film, and so I knew I wanted to make this something big, but so, to go for a feature instead of a short. I'd made a ton of shorts before this, but I knew that to make a feature, I would have to go back home where I knew the lay of the land, and I knew who I could call. I knew places that we could have access to, characters and moments moments from that world were the first things that came to my mind. And so I think it would have been very hard for me to not make this kind of in a place that's like I feel like is my first home. Yeah.
Your two leads are very strong, different women, but I feel like this is very much a story of maybe your existence as well. I think one of the elements of the movie that I really loved was her talking to her mother in particular. Those scenes are some of the funniest, subtle little moments that only someone who has talked to their mother would write something like that. But also the music side of it, you just said you worked in that place. I'm curious if you've seen those characters in reality and how much of yourself are in these two women.
Well, yeah, I mean, totally a ton, for sure. You know, I think that like Sophie is really an amalgamation of myself and a bunch of my friends from back home. You know, and you know, I think really on a deeper level, both women are kind of represent kind of metaphorically different aspects of my own experience growing up as an Indian first generation artist in the American South. I mean, it's a very kind of strange series of juxtapositions and like weird kind of contradictions and paradoxes that you have to navigate in order to just kind of exist and relate to other people. And you know, and it's, I think what kind of sometimes I get bored by in a lot of indie films is how they approach that with such a kind of this monotonous sadness or kind of wistfulness, and there is a certain trauma and pain to be navigated, and I think that's hopefully reflected at a deeper level in this film. But I also think that's just really funny and weird and just kind of random and absurd, and I wanted to kind of bring that sense of not only kind of strangeness but also spontaneity and excitement that all of that can represent, and like put that into a film. So yeah.
Do you mind if I ask like very subtle questions about some of the choices?
Sure, yeah.
The gun that's used in the shooting, I won't say what happens with the shooting, I don't want to spoil it. Who found that gun? What the hell is that gun? It's a crazy gun.
Yeah. That's an interesting question. Yeah, so the gun, you know, it was in the script. I always knew that there had to be some kind of element that really kind of pushed them to go on the run. And it's also, I think, just a great classic reference to this whole genre of filmmaking. You know, there's always, you know, this goes back to Chekhov talking about the gun and when it'll go off, etc. So I knew I wanted to play with that. But, you know, I really don't know the first thing about guns, you know, and you know, I've obviously grown up around guns being from the South, like my whole life, but I was always kind of wary of them. And but so for the film, we found an armorer locally, a guy that specializes in weapons, like especially for film and TV productions. And we had a few meetings with him, and we went back and forth about like different references and ideas for, well, what kind of gun could it be? You know, also how we could fake it in the film. Because there are like different levels, you know, there's like the prosthetic ones and the ones that actually fire, like fake squibs, et cetera, you know. So we're thinking like, what will we actually do for the movie? And you know, I think I very quickly realized it couldn't really be a modern gun, like, or one that very seriously felt like something that could seriously cause violence. It just didn't feel right. Like, you know, I was imagining our characters running around with an actual gun, and I knew that it had to kind of work more at the kind of picturesque or symbolic or kind of absurd level. You know, the more of an idea of a gun than an actual gun, and you know, so we kind of went way old, and I was like, okay, well, what are some of the oldest guns, the weirdest, most obscure guns that are still actually sometimes sold at these kinds of places? And we started talking to the pawn owner, and he was like, well, I do have this like weird like costume. It's like a Civil War musket, basically. And then we got really into these like kind of Civil War era muskets, Revolutionary era even, and found basically this Brown Bess, which is the original gun that the British actually used to colonize India. And it's basically a front-loading cannon. So there's kind of no way that the gun could be used in the way that it's alluded to in the film, which is like they cock it and they shoot it off, like, and it accidentally lets off, like as though it were a modern gun. It's like you have to load it in the front, and like tamp it down and like light it, you know. And it's this this whole thing. And so I always thought that was a funny little kind of wink to the audience, to, again, a kind of a Brechtian distancing. You know, in the same way, I think you kind of see references of like the Indian art on Jyoti's wall throughout the film. And for me, that's like, again, subtle reminders that another way of seeing is possible. You know, like when we tell these stories about people's experiences, I don't think they always have to work at the very literal naturalistic level of, well, this happened to me, then this happened, then this happened. I think you can tell a story that way. But there's this rich tradition throughout human history of mythic, epic, symbolic poetry. And these are sometimes the stories that stick around with us the longest, kind of get lodged in our minds. And I kind of wanted the gun to work that way as well.
It adds so much. I was blown. I was like, why that gun? And then I thought about it and I was like, it's kind of perfect.
Yeah, thank you.
One of the elements of the movie that works so well is the way they work off of each other, that road trip element and them bonding in their unique way. Can you talk a bit about those two actresses and how did you work with them to connect on that level? Because I do feel there is some genuine, real connection between these two actresses.
Yeah. You know, it was really interesting. So there were two very different actors. So like I said, one was a first-time actor who's also my mom, and the other was a professional actor from New York who I'd seen in some shorts and a feature and always wanted to work with, and we finally were able to collaborate. And so we had completely different processes. So like with Lucy, who's also a writer as well as an actor, I like kind of shared the whole script. I shared multiple drafts. We like developed the script based around my and her like kind of mutual understanding of her character that we kind of found together. Whereas with my mom's character, you know, with the character that my mom plays, you know, I had written it kind of modeled on how I thought that she would respond to these situations. And it was really very close to her. You know, there's some major details that are changed, but so I just knew that I had to get her to be in the moment and respond naturally, and that would kind of be the trick of kind of unlocking her performance. So she never got the whole script at all.
You hid the script from your own mother.
Yeah. She only got her pages the morning of, and I knew she has such a good memory, like she picks things up really quickly, that I knew she could get her lines. But she didn't know the plot of the film until after it got into a festival. But so I think for us, when we brought them together, when we brought these two processes together, we knew that the main thing was, so we've kind of developed these characters and we think they can stand on their own, and now we have to kind of find this chemistry between them. But I think the beauty of the kind of how we shot and this corresponds to the script is that this happens in the script, you know. So they're strangers at the beginning, and then they become closer and closer, and they go through a lot together. And I'll have to say, like, as exaggerated and absurd and insane as the movie is, I think the production, which in the heat of the summer in North Carolina, was also pretty extreme. And I think they really did bond throughout the course of the production, and kind of the developing relationship that you see on the screen, I think also reflects what's going on between the scenes. And, you know, so like this indie film, we worked out of my parents' house, shot out of my parents' house, but also a bunch of the cast and the crew lived out of my parents' house. And so my mom obviously was there, but Sophie also stayed in the room upstairs, and we had like dinners after set every night and breakfast in the morning. And so they actually kind of grew very familiar and comfortable with each other because of, I think, the kind of very indie bootstraps way we made it as well. So
what did it mean to know that it would be playing here at Bentonville, something that shares a uniqueness like you of out of place but in a southern setting?
Totally.
Is this kind of the perfect festival for this film?
I would say so. I mean, you know, we lived here for a whole year in the past year during the pandemic, and so it's kind of a homecoming to even be back. And you know, it's just been such a pleasure seeing like friends and members of our old community, as well as new folks just coming into the theater all to just watch the film. I mean, we were oversold at the screening last night, and so there's just this energy that I think we're getting now from the response and the distribution of the film that that I think really fits the vibe of the whole project. But like you said, I think also like the kind of strange little island that we're in here, and like that whole feeling of a lot of different things happening all at once, I think makes this a strangely fitting place to play. Yeah.
Well, I loved the film. I know I told you before. I cracked up this entire film.
Thank you very much.
I can't wait for people to see it. I think it'll blow people away.
Thank you.
I'd love to just end with the title of the film.
Yeah.
Why that title?
Yeah, so it's called Have a Nice Life, and it's a quote that comes out of Jodie's mouth, like toward the end of the film. I won't really spoil the context, but I like the phrase because it's like Janus faced, you know. It looks both ways, you know. There's like have a nice life, and there's kind of, you can say it earnestly, and then there's also this there's the cynical kind of way you can say it as well, where it kind of means the exact opposite. And I just think that it's so interesting. I mean, it's like the glass of water that's half full or half empty, you know. It's life, you know. It's well, how are you going to look at this thing? And it kind of throws the question back to the audience,
which I think is part of the film too. I love that. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.